stepped into what many call an impossible job. 90% currency collapse, millions impoverished, a shattered economy. Where do you begin?
For me, and I think for most ministers in this cabinet, no job is impossible. We're all here because we think we can make a difference. One of the alarming things is that the rate of poverty of children aged 0 to 5 is double the national average. That would probably be at least 500,000. And that's very alarming for the future.
The IMF, a couple of years ago, it offered a $3 billion loan to Lebanon, but it's token compared to the $85 billion hole that the banking and economic crisis left. But in exchange, they're demanding austerity that punishes ordinary citizens. Why should your ministry support an IMF deal that destroys what's left of Lebanon's private sector and middle class while leaving the incompetent state apparatus untouched?
We're going to have to do these reforms with or without the IMF, but it's better to do it with the IMF because it gives that stamp of approval globally.
Even if Lebanon had the money, is there any point in starting reconstruction with Israel continuing to attack almost daily? Doesn't Lebanon really need to solve this political military situation?
We need a serious ceasefire, and we cannot have stability, either social or economic stability, until that is done.
We've seen Tom Barak, Morgan Ortagus, who've made statements on the situation with disarming Hezbollah. Even Amos Hochstein, the former US envoy under Biden, said it is a problem to try and impose disarmament on Hezbollah when Israel continues to violate the ceasefire. Why is America and the Lebanese government imposing more conditions on Hezbollah, and yet nothing is being done in relation to Israel?
The disarmament is not just about Hezbollah, it's about, of course, all arms in the country that have to be in the hands of the armies. If one political party has arms, that immediately changes the balance of power.
Can the Lebanese army defend Lebanon?
Israel is the enemy, and there's no trust in politics. But for me, it can only be the army of Lebanon that can defend. I would rather have an army or a state versus a state fighting it out or figuring it out than a state versus a militia. That formula just doesn't work. It has destroyed Lebanon.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Real Talk podcast. Today we host Lebanon's Social Affairs Minister, the Honourable Haneen Sayed, at a pivotal moment for Lebanon. The country is grappling with overlapping crises, a collapsed economy and a devastating war, making Minister Sayed's role more crucial than ever. To provide proper context, I'll take a few minutes to share essential background information that will help frame the significance of this conversation. In 2019, Lebanon's financial system imploded. The Lebanese pound has since lost over 90% of its value, plunging most of the population into poverty. Millions now struggle with hyperinflation, a shattered banking sector, and widespread unemployment. Then came a 14-month war between Hezbollah and Israel from October 2023 to November 24. That killed nearly 4,000 Lebanese and injured over 16,500. Vast swaths of Lebanon, especially the Shiite majority in the south and the Bekaa Valley, lie in ruins. Social welfare has become a lifeline, and the Ministry of Social Affairs is on the front line of relief efforts. Minister Sayed entered government as part of a new reformist cabinet led by Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, formed in early 2025 under intense international pressure. This is Lebanon's fully fledged government since 2022, established following a ceasefire that ended the brutal Israel-Hezbollah war. President Joseph Aoun, former Lebanese commander-in-chief of the army, was elected as part of that deal that secured the ceasefire. The international community, including the US, France, and regional Arab states, made clear they expect deep reforms and rebuilding before releasing major aid. Prime Minister Salam, a respected former International Court of Justice judge and its president, vowed to lead a government of reform and salvation as a technocratic team free of traditional political party influence. 5 of the 24 ministers are women, almost a national record for gender equality. The Honourable Haneen Sayed is one of them, and her appointment as Social Affairs Minister has been met with cautious optimism that expertise rather than patronage will drive social recovery. Madam Sayed is a distinguished economist and development expert who spent over 30 years at the World Bank leading its social response to Lebanon's financial crisis. She has also worked with JP Morgan Stanley and regional development institutions with degrees from Stanford and Columbia universities. She brings decades of experience to a ministry desperately needing fresh vision. Upon taking office, Minister Sayed acknowledged, "We have a lot of work to do," addressing war fallout and Lebanon's soaring poverty rate. She highlighted that the war's devastation dramatically increased poverty and hardship. One of her first priorities is expanding social safety nets in coordination with international partners. Under her ministry's oversight are several World Bank-funded programs aimed at cushioning vulnerable families from the economic collapse. For instance, Minister Sayed has announced emergency cash assistance initiatives reaching over 260,000 Lebanese in war-impacted areas, providing direct support for 6 months. These funds and programs, along with food aid and community development projects, are crucial stopgaps while broader economic reforms take hold. The ministry is also central to post-war reconstruction efforts, especially in supporting families who lost homes and livelihoods. Southern towns and villages bore the brunt of Israeli bombardment and Hezbollah Israel clashes, leaving infrastructure and homes obliterated. Reconstruction has barely begun. Lebanon simply doesn't have the funds. Estimates put recovery needs at $11 billion, with at least $4 billion just for reconstruction. Minister Sayed's team coordinates humanitarian relief and rebuilding in these devastated areas, even as the government scrambles to secure aid. Notably, Speaker of Parliament Nabi Berri, leader of the Aman movement, has warned he won't approve a new budget without clear reconstruction funds, underscoring how urgent and politically charged this issue is. Minister Sayed has emphasised reinforcing the state's presence in the south through social programs and services. She argues that humanitarian support and development will help heal the social fabric and strengthen peace, provided the ceasefire holds. Lebanon's growing profile has not gone unnoticed internationally. US Envoy Morgan Ortagus, Deputy Special Envoy for Middle East Peace, paid Minister Sayed a visit recently in Beirut. This high-profile visit, also attended by the US Embassy's Charge d'Affaires Keith Hannigan, was seen by many observers as Washington's interest in Lebanon's social recovery, as well as a vote of confidence in Sayed's ministry and perhaps in Sayed herself as a rising leader. As a Sunni Muslim official in a country where the Prime Minister's seat is reserved for the Sunni community, Haneen Sayed occupies a uniquely significant position. She sits at the intersection of social policy and sectarian dynamics, and some speculate international actors are investing in her ability to help steer Lebanon towards stability. During their meeting, Sayed impressed upon the US envoy the need for enhanced international support to confront Lebanon's humanitarian challenges. It's clear that global players are watching closely, not just to deliver relief to suffering Lebanese, but because the US has set firm expectations. They insist no aid will flow to a Lebanese government that includes Hezbollah in a dominant role. Ortagus herself warned that if Hezbollah holds significant power, Lebanon could be isolated and cut off from outside assistance. Minister Sayed navigates not only the economic minefield at home, but also the geopolitical pressures from abroad. In this special Real Talk episode, we delve into these most pressing challenges and will seek to understand how she plans to address them. Thank you very much. I apologise for the long-winded introduction, but I did want to give everyone a full background because many people don't understand the context But I really welcome you, and it has been a long time coming, but wanted to wait until the right moment to give you a chance to get your feet under the desk and hands into or claws into this ministry to be able to sit down with you. It is my great pleasure and honour to be sitting with you today for this conversation.
Thank you, Daisy. It's my pleasure as well.
We're going to get straight into it and look at the crisis and your approach to it and the impossibility of the job that you've been put into. You stepped into what many call an impossible job. 90% currency collapse, millions impoverished, a shattered economy. Where do you begin? Where did you begin?
For me, and I think for most ministers in this cabinet, no job is impossible. I mean, we're all here. We took this. We accepted these positions because we think we can make a difference, and this is what we're committed to. Where do we start? Of course, there's multiple layers. So, in fact, the first thing that I did when I came to ministry is to meet with the staff. I wanted to know who is in the ministry. I wanted to know their capabilities. I wanted to know their commitments, because I know I cannot do this job without the ministry staff. Many ministers come in and bring in a lot of their experts and consultants, and they think this is how they can do the job. I'm not like that. To me, I have to get the staff on board. And in fact, this is what I did. The first thing was, within the first 2 weeks, convened a mini retreat, if you will, of the senior staff of the ministry. We sat for 3 days in the conference room
concept.
Here. Could be, but it
well,
works. And we sat for 3 days in the conference room here in the ministry. We didn't go to anything fancy. And for about hours and hours of conversation, I asked them, what is your vision? What are the challenges? What would you like this ministry to be? And they came up with a vision, which we have launched, and a new strategy, and I will talk about that a bit later. But that, I think, that was the first thing I did, was because I know I needed to get people behind me. Second, you want to meet then with wider stakeholders, of course, because social issues really affect every single Lebanese, every single person in Lebanon, let's put it that way. So I started to discuss and meet with the wider stakeholders, being civil society, the NGOs and institutions that support social welfare, social care. So until today, 8 or 9 months later, my agenda every week, I must have maybe 20 meetings just with these stakeholders. It's packed. And of course, you have to meet with members of parliament. I mean, they request. So you kind of broaden the understanding. So that first priority is to understand what's going on. Then start to think of how can we, what are the priorities? How are we going to address the big challenges? And you mentioned them in your introduction. We have economic collapse. We have poverty is very high and continues to increase. Vulnerability, child poverty. One of the alarming things that I have discovered in this period is that the rate of poverty of children aged 0 to 5 is double the national average. And that's very alarming for the future.
What percentages of children?
So if we consider national poverty of Lebanese, is 33%, 35%. And that's already two years ago, before the conflict. So we don't have data as of today, but we expect obviously it increased.
Those living below the poverty line?
Those living before the poverty line.
Wasn't the World Bank assessment
Lebanese.
Of like 80%, like
no,
4 years ago?
And that's a different, no. Actually, these are World Bank figures, but there's a different measurement of poverty called the MPI, Multidimensional Poverty Index.
Right.
And that gives you numbers of 80%, but I think that's a little bit too high. Anyway, let's take the figure that is more generally used. Compared, child poverty is close to 60%. So 33 for the national average, but child poverty of ages 0 to 5. That's very alarming. So
how many kids are we talking about? How many children between the ages of 0 and 5 in Lebanon? Any idea?
That would probably be at least 500,000, I would say, 400 to 500,000.
Wow.
It's a big number, absolutely. My point here also is that, in terms of your question, like how did I get... So we're looking at the data, looking to understand what the situation, what are the challenges. So all of this is part of the strategy that we developed with the ministry staff. And then seeing how we're going to address them. What are the policies that need to be changed? What are the programs that we need to put in place? Of course, what is my capacity and what is the funding that I have?
Yes.
So that's in a nutshell of how I started to address the
Yeah.
very big challenges that you have mentioned in your introduction.
And we'll go into more specific projects as we conduct this interview. But looking at the World Bank, let's look at your history a little bit so people get a better understanding of your background and capability and why you were chosen. There's a significant reason why the Prime Minister selected you. You spent more than 30 years at the World Bank designing programs for crisis situations. Before I go into the specifics of Lebanon, tell us a bit about your experience there and the experience you gained working at the World Bank.
So I spent close to 30 years at the World Bank, half of it in Washington, D.C., where I worked, however, on many regions of the world. And then the other half, I moved to be based in the World Bank office in Beirut, which is a sub-regional office covering several countries. I focused on human development. I mean, I'm an economist, but I worked specifically on human capital, human development, education. I've worked health, social protection, poverty, gender. These were the areas that I covered. And working in different parts of the world. And this was my objective before moving to MENA. When I first joined the bank, I wanted to get really that true international experience. So I have experience in East Asia, in South Asia, in Latin America, Caribbean. So so that was, it's a very rich experience, if you will. I also moved within the World Bank from operations to corporate to also get a wider view. I worked at the Executive Directors Board for 3 years, which really gave the global picture of the ecosystem and the like. It's a very rich experience.
Sorry to interrupt you, but are there specific projects you can give us an insight into that you worked or implemented or helped implement or devise?
Sure. I mean, I was managing multi-billion-dollar projects in various countries. I can tell you, for example, in Jordan, I worked on education reform for about 10 years, helping the Jordanian government reform its education sector, especially moving it into the knowledge economy. We would support everything from curriculum design to teacher training to building new schools where needed, all aspects of comprehensive education reform. I worked on many social protection portfolios for pension reform, in Lebanon pension reform, in Syria actually before 2011 I was very active in helping also the then Syrian government put in place a social safety net program, pension reform. I worked on labor market reform, so
wow.
It cuts across.
Great.
And worked in emergency cases as well as in more classic development. For example, in Egypt, I had worked on Egypt on labor market programs, helping employment in vulnerable areas, but then worked on crisis situation, whether it be Lebanon, of course, among other countries.
And just as a side, I mean, a lot of people are very suspicious of the World Bank institutions, these global institutions, IMF, World Bank. They believe they're, US constructs to try and take, ownership of a country and keep it in debt and basically ransom the country. Tell us what your opinion is, having worked within it for so long, and what you have a much better opinion of it.
Of course, I disagree with that view, and let's say it's highly exaggerated. Now, the World Bank, as well as the IMF, they have a board of executive directors, and these do represent the countries. That's because they are the shareholders of the institutions, so they represent the countries. So, of course, they will bring in politics, if you will, into their decision making. But as an institution, and in the World Bank's constitution, if you will, the Articles of Agreement, it says no political interference. That's very clear. So as a structure, as an institution, as management and staff, they do not get involved in politics of a country. But the board, as I mentioned, can potentially, in their decision of approving or not approving a project, can bring in their political view of that country. Now, the U.S. is a shareholder, like many other shareholders. They do not have the majority. They have maybe 15% of the votes. So there's not close to having that kind of veto power that is mentioned, that they run the show and so on. So I think you're right, there's lack of understanding of how the institutions work. But to some extent, of course, these institutions are going to reflect the global economic power. That's what it's
where the sentiment is at the
where
moment.
Some of that comes in. Yes,
Definitely. Well, then let's come back to Lebanon then. How different is it, or how hard is it now being in the role that you're sitting in now in the other end, the opposite side, having to implement these policies or these programs into a country that once you analysed and you recommended for countries? What's the difference for you? How do you feel?
Definitely, it's different. In the World Bank, you also get deep into the institutional and governance issues of a country. If you're designing a project, you have to sort of be able to give the right advice of whether a program or project is implementable. And we have to customize it for the country's situation. So you do get into that. But in the end, of course, it's always the responsibility of the government to implement. The World Bank as an institution does not implement programs. It's the government. So now I'm the government. And now it's my responsibility ultimately to implement. Absolutely. So this is the big difference. I am responsible to making things work well, things that are making sure programs are transparent, that they're accountable. This is the difference. And I think that this is, it's almost like now putting yourself really to test all the advice you used to give all these years.
Absolutely.
Is it really implementable? This is now what I have gained, and what is fundamentally different, but it's actually a challenge, but it's a good challenge. I think in the end, if we can make a difference, we this is what I'm trying to do.
No, it's I would feel like it's exciting for you to have the opportunity. I know it's it's a real challenge, and you've got to now fulfill those expectations and priorities that once you used to dictate to others or recommend to others politely. And let's see how that goes. But let's talk about the World Bank's role directly with Lebanon. And earlier this year, it announced it was giving Lebanon $250 million. But you also just recently came back from a trip to Washington, D.C., where there was a meeting with the World Bank. Can you give us an overview of how those meetings went and what the major takeaways were and what's the next step with the World Bank?
Sure. So the meetings that we were at a couple of weeks ago with the Minister of Finance, Minister of Economy, and the Governor of the Central Bank are called the annual meetings of the World Bank and IMF, where all the governors of the countries, all the ministers of finance and planning converge once a year. Actually, it's twice a year, but the big event happens once a year in the fall. And a lot of discussions and a lot of meetings. It's a great opportunity for each country, and in this case Lebanon, to meet with senior management of both institutions and to update them on our reform plans, our progress since the last 6 months that we met, and what our plans are, and of course to discuss the kind of support that we need. The World Bank support to Lebanon is actually significant, and just this week we've had a visit from about 10 executive directors coming to see what is the situation on the ground. It's actually very positive, the World Bank's support to Lebanon. The focus is obviously much more on infrastructure and investment in public infrastructure. So 6 months ago, there was a $250 million energy project that was approved. There's a water project. There is a project on public finance with Ministry of Finance, public finance management. And now, my main objective of being in these meetings was to also confirm the support for the Aman program, the social safety net program, which is supporting today 800,000 Lebanese every month. So,
are these the displaced or the poverty?
No, these are the poverty, exactly. It's national. It's for all Lebanese who fall under the poverty line as defined by particular methodology. And this is about 20% of the Lebanese population, because remember I said poverty is still high. Now the 20%, however, that we are reaching every month is still 60% of the poor. So we're not even reaching 100% of the poor. Nevertheless, 60% is considered good coverage, and we're talking about a part of the population which is under what's called food poverty. They cannot, they're not able to sustain their minimum caloric intake. So the program, Aman, this safety net program, provides them a monthly cash of about, depending on the family size, $100, $110. And it is hugely beneficial. I mean, we actually have data on how helpful this amount has been for a family of 4 or 5. $100 can go a long
what can you
way.
buy?
I know for most Lebanese this sounds insane, but it is absolutely critical. Has had effect on reducing poverty. We have data on this, on their food security. But of course, this is the minimum we can provide. And I want to make a point here that we're not stopping just as providing cash assistance. That's just the starting point. We're now providing them services, providing them, making sure that their children are in public schools. So there is an additional amount that's given to children that have potential to drop out. Also providing them free primary health care. And now the new approach of the ministry is to get them into the labor market, economic inclusion. And I can speak more about that, but this is part of the new approach of the ministry, changing from Ministry of Social Affairs to Social Development.
Yes.
We've already had the cabinet approve the name change, and now Parliament will approve it shortly. But it's beyond just a new name. It's really about changing the approach of the ministry. We're talking about development now. So development that comes through being integrated in the labor market, being able to have the right skills, community development, so developing the individual, the family, the community. And so my priority is to not just give social assistance. It's really to get people empowered so that they can
be independent.
Be independent, absolutely.
So there's sustainable development programs so that they can then stand on their own 2 feet and not
Absolutely.
be just putting the hand out for handouts all the time.
Absolutely. Yes.
Very important initiatives because, I guess human beings all over the world would prefer to be able to be free and independent and not be in the submissive position. Especially Lebanese, I find that there's a lot of talent and capability, but lack of opportunity too. So
Right.
being able to connect those dots would be very helpful.
Right, and don't forget, we're still, as you mentioned in the beginning, we're still in a economic, financial crisis. So there are not many jobs being created. So once the economy starts to come back, hopefully with the economic reforms that our government is embarking on, you start getting jobs, job creation, you start getting, poverty reduction, and then there's less need for people to be on social assistance. I mean, naturally, people will start obviously moving into jobs. But my job is, or my role, or the ministry's role, is that those who are really vulnerable, don't have the right skills, don't know how to access the job market, this is where we have to help them. And there's many successful ways, you can connect them to microfinance institutions, for example, that have been quite successful in Lebanon and now are coming back. Or you can, if it's a population that cannot take a small loan, because microfinance tends to be on a loan basis, you can give them a grant and help them, or an asset transfer, help them to do something, sew a sewing machine at home, or some initial capital to open up a little shop. So these are the approach that we really want to move towards.
It's really funny because when I was here in 22, when I moved back officially, and I spent a lot of time on the ground, moving around. This after I did all the interviews for the documentary, and the documentary was out. But we spent 6 to 8 months around, and I found so much capability in so many Lebanese, younger and older people who had skills but no capacity to start their own business or initiate a new business because their money had been lost in the banking crisis. And it was one of the things that really came to mind for, I did speak to some major investors or, Lebanese in the diaspora about the microfinancing. And like you mentioned, they were popular before, but because of the crisis and economic collapse, they did dry up. Some still continued, but it was something that they just need $100 or $500 or $1,000 and they could get on with it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's coming back. That is starting to come back. And we've recently had 2 of the big microfinance institutions in Lebanon recapitalized, and they will start being able to give lending. And from my side, because I have huge databases of beneficiaries. Basically, I make that match.
Connect them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I say, okay, guys, let's say in that area, what area? I go into my database. I can do skills profiling. I can profile the families, and basically we get additional information on them. What skills do they have? What skills are they missing? And then we connect them to these institutions. I mean, and here is something that is one of my babies, if you will. It's the power of data. We actually in this ministry have a lot of data. In fact, we have data.
Is it digitized?
Yes, that's
God.
the beauty of it. Absolutely, no. For sure.
So many people tell me their records are still on paper, like in some of the ministries.
There is that too. I do have that. But for my social assistance programs and beneficiaries, I have around 500,000 Lebanese households. That's half the population. There's about 1 million Lebanese households in my database. And a group of those, of course, are receiving social assistance through the Aman program. Others are receiving social services. And now others will be going through the economic inclusion, the job creation programs. So data is very important. But absolutely, I'm creating, in fact, what's called an integrated beneficiary registry, IBR, which will connect all of my databases as we start to digitize more and more of the other services. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Excellent. I know I'm coming back to this, but I did want to ask you, when you were meeting with the World Bank and the IMF, how was their reaction to you this time around and to the Lebanese delegation? Because for years they've probably never seen people like this new government, and I assume, and I'm being biased, I guess people will see I'm being biased here, but I look at this government as very different to the governments of the last 20 years, 30 years that have represented Lebanon. Probably not every minister or every, role, but the political party bias is not as evident. But yeah, what was the take and how was their reaction?
It was very positive. As I mentioned, I mean, both institutions are very keen on supporting Lebanon, and it's really up to us now to present the reforms, to make the reforms happen, and not just with World Bank, IMF. I mean, even in Europe with the European Union, who we also met bilaterally in Washington, and then with some of the bilaterals, the French, and of course the Gulf countries. I mean, that's most important. So we met with many of them, including the Arab funds in Washington. So very positive.
Do they trust you? Do they trust this government?
Absolutely. I mean, yes, we felt that. And the other thing what was notable about our visit this time, and even in the spring when we went, is that we're coherent. As an economic, financial, social team, we're coherent. Unfortunately, previously there were different views from one delegation and the like, but we really were all on the same message, and this was noted by the other side. And I think this really reflects how this government works. Despite even there are some political parties and so on, but we work extremely well together, all of us.
That's a huge thing you just said then. The cohesion of the government, alignment is critical. And it's something that it was probably very refreshing for them to see that it wasn't coming from different angles and different vested interests.
Absolutely.
We're seeing the vested interest of Lebanon being represented.
I mean, I can give you concrete examples. Let's say in my case, Ministry of Social Affairs, we work with Minister of Labor on the issues of, jobs and economic inclusion and disability. I work with Minister of Health on primary health care, social development centers. Many of the social development centers in my ministry provide primary health care. I work with the Minister of AI, the newly established ministry. He's helping us with the digitization. We work with Minister of Administrative Reforms, of course, part of the reform of the business process that I want to do in this ministry.
Yeah.
I work with, of course, Minister of Economy, where we're doing some analytical work together, of course, with Ministry of Finance. I mean, you name it. And every minister has the same, and also the beauty about Ministry of Social Affairs, and I'd like this opportunity to mention it, is that social issues are cross-sectoral. I mean, look at an individual or a family. They don't just need education or just need health or just need jobs. They need a whole bunch of these things, combination, and at different time of their life, this is the life cycle approach, you need different things. So Ministry of Social Affairs, or Social Development soon to be called, this is how we work. We work cross-sectorally. It's really beautiful, and it's what development is all about. Development is not about one single aspect. So by definition, if I'm going to do my job well, we've got to work with all these different, with Minister of Public Works, for example, accessibility for disabled. Ministry of Social, one of our main priorities is people with disabilities. We lead on that as policy and as programs. But I can't get very far if Minister of Public Works doesn't makes the roads accessible, public spaces have to be accessible, and so on and so forth. So across the board is, this is what, and I think people are seeing that. The Lebanese are seeing it, and the international community is seeing it. The feedback we get when they come visit us, diplomats, ambassadors and the like, is that they see that coherence.
And you're finding working together is working? With those other ministries,
absolutely.
They're all cooperating?
Absolutely.
That's
yes,
the most important thing. You might have a great idea, and yes, it works this way, we've got to collaborate. But if you have parties that are not willing to work with you. And you're right about helping, people. You can't tick housing or food, providing food for them, food security and housing security, and then they need education, and then you abandon them to go to the education ministry. It's got to be all tied in together. So that's a very
absolutely. And I'm
effective
really the only
policy.
ministry that has that mandate and ability to do that and flexibility to do that.
Wonderful. Let's jump quickly just to talk about the IMF. A few years ago, it offered a $3 billion loan to Lebanon, but it's a token compared to the $85 billion hole that the banking and economic crisis left. But in exchange, they were demanding austerity that punishes ordinary citizens, while the state that caused the collapse escapes accountability. We're not talking about this state, but the governments of the past that created the collapse. Banks and depositors are being sacrificed through retroactive penalties and deposit haircuts, while public spending, like the electricity sector, black hole, remains untouched. Why should your ministry support an IMF deal that destroys what's left of Lebanon's private sector and middle class, while leaving the incompetent state apparatus untouched?
So let's make the record clear. It's not my ministry, right? This is a government commitment.
Yes.
In the government statement, our Bayan Wizari, we committed that we will first address the issue, the banking issue and the depositors. That would also include a program with the IMF. The $3 billion you mentioned before, of course, didn't actually materialize.
No.
It was what's called a staff level agreement, which is an initial part, and then government had to achieve certain reforms. It didn't happen, so the money didn't actually materialize.
No.
And now we're actually giving it, we could say, another try. Now, look, I think what's important about doing an IMF agreement is not the $3 billion. In fact, I think Lebanon can bring through private investment $30 billion in, over a period of time. And soon there will be a big conference for investors in the country to kind of go down that road. But Lebanon needs more kind of support, investment from the private sector. But the $3 billion, or let's say the agreement with the IMF, whatever the amount is a signal to the international community of that we're serious about reform. It's a commitment on our side that we want to do the reform. It's not that they are imposing it on us. I mean, the program that we are putting forward to the IMF is really, it's homemade. Now, we're discussing. They have different views on things. We have different views of things. And the economic team of Minister of Finance, Economy, and Central Bank Governor are, lead on this to basically say these are the financial reforms that we want. This is the kind of fiscal reforms that we want, and so on. Now, the IMF would be a kind of a stamp of approval. So, and we're going to have to do these reforms with or without the IMF. But it's better to do it with the IMF because it gives that stamp of approval globally, whether it be the Gulf countries, whether it be the European Union, and the like.
You're saying it gives it a stamp of approval because they would put in their structures, or it would go through a level of scrutiny
Of
that
course,
they would impose?
again,
Or they would
I don't use
execute?
the word impose.
No.
I really don't think that that's even, IMF projects we've worked on many years, many times. There's no such thing really as impose. I mean, because in the end, even these institutions have learned that if a government doesn't own the reform program, it will not succeed. They've learned it that way, the hard way in the past 30, 40 years. And so any program really that they want to support, it's got to be homegrown, has to be really so. But they provide technical assistance, they provide, international experience about how things cannot work. So that's all very important. There's, of course, monitoring that they do on their side. I mean, in the end, both institutions act like a bank. They're giving you money. So any bank wants to make sure that fiduciary-wise, you're not using the money in the wrong things. That's natural. So that's what there's these aspects that come in, ensure that there's transparency and the like. Again, all of these things are things that we want as well.
Yeah, very good. Makes sense. Let's jump into the emergency actions that have been taken so far, emergency aid in hyperinflation. So we talked about, what we have here is that there's your ministry being in charge of distributing around, distributing emergency cash to over 260,000 war-affected Lebanese. Is that people or households? And
That's individuals.
That's
people.
individuals.
Yes.
Okay. And is that part of the group that you were talking about earlier, who is receiving the $100, or
The
does
Aman
that
program.
come?
Yeah.
The Aman program, or is that a separate?
No, it's
initiative?
a separate group. So let me tell you
Okay.
what this is all about. And you asked me in the beginning, what are the challenges? What did I face when I came in?
Yes.
We came in with, at the aftermath of a war, which has led to destruction. Why destruction? 14 billion actually is economic and physical loss that the World Bank has estimated. And a lot of people still displaced. I mean, although when the ceasefire happened last year, like 1 million went back home. There was like 1.2 million displaced, and then very quickly about 1 million. But there's still a number, 100,000, that are still displaced. And we cannot accept to have 6-7 months after ceasefire that there's still that many Lebanese that are IDPs, internally displaced people. So
Are they from the border towns, villages that were decimated by Israel?
Absolutely, but also from Daizy and also from Bekaa. So from the
Yes.
3 areas that were hit hard during the war, and they're displaced in neighboring areas and what have you. It's a very vulnerable population. So we came in, we said, okay, I think it's a priority for us to help our citizens, especially the most vulnerable, and that's in the end is the responsibility of my ministry, the most vulnerable populations. So we had already data on them. They had registered because a few months earlier, people who were displaced were asked to register. So they registered on a platform, all digital. We went and visited them, updated the information, and actually checked and saw were they really displaced and their vulnerability level. And that's the program that I announced 3 months ago and started implementing it. I went to Nabati and I announced it there to 260,000 individuals that were displaced, a monthly cash transfer for 6 months. We've now done 3 months. We're now in the second phase until the end of the year. The value of the transfer is about the same as the other program, Aman, the national program.
It's about $100 odd dollars a
Yes,
month.
depending on family size, absolutely. And again, it is support. It's like basic thing to just help people support. And the next thing I want to move to is to try to help those that are still without shelter. Many are staying with family, let's say. Some have already been able to find, a place to live and they're able to make it. But there are a good number, maybe 10, 20,000 families, we're still figuring it out, who are in some form or other in shelters which are not sustainable, including several public schools still. Those we want to help them to get into some kind of better accommodation, support them with some rental value, but really what's also important here, Daizy, is that the state is playing its role, can and should continue to play its role, especially for the most vulnerable populations. And this is what we're trying to do here. Yes, it's great that Lebanon has a huge non-state sector, the NGOs that do great work and provide this and that. But ultimately, for vulnerable populations, especially who are really left, no one to take care of them, or their funding for them has declined, this is a responsibility of the state.
And it's refreshing to hear it. I mean, looking at it from what I listen to and what I hear and what people tell us, not only locally, but diaspora families talking about their own families in the South. And it feels like that message isn't getting across, that what the government is actually doing. That people saying it's up to the government needs to do this, it's responsibility of the government. And that, Hezbollah used to play a major role in those areas, providing education, shelter support, hospitalisation and so much. And people still assume it is helping them. But I guess with the amount of destruction resulting from the war, those institutions have been, decimated. So it's great to hear that the government is stepping in and doing what a government should be doing, because then the loyalty to whatever group, whether it's Hezbollah or any other political organisation, will, dissipate. And not that we're trying to abandon your political beliefs. We're not. I think the most important thing is that Lebanese government hasn't been playing its role for decades, and it needs to step in.
For all its citizens.
For
Yes,
all its citizens.
absolutely.
Doesn't matter what religious group you're from. So it's good to hear that.
A way of rebuilding the trust between the state and its
Yes.
citizens. I mean, this is one theme that I've actually written about. An article that I did at published on Carnegie Middle East Center about how to rebuild the trust between the state and the citizen through social services.
That's right.
So really, I feel now I'm here and I can make that happen.
So you've got another 3 months of this project or program. What happens after that?
After, yeah.
Yeah.
And after 3 months, there will still be needs because, but and we will seek support. I mean, these programs, by the way, now are funded. This particular, we call it shock responsive safety net program.
Okay.
Funded from a donor community, but increasingly
Outside Arab or
it's international. It's a combination.
Okay.
U.S. and EU, and it's a combination. It's a pooled fund that international community puts money in. They will be as generous, continue to be generous, but then, of course, government budget has to kick in. For Aman program, by the way, the major safety net, the one that reaches 20% of the population. We allocated as a government in our next budget of 26 a tenfold increase in the budget for it.
Wow.
It was getting only 5 million from the budget, and now the Minister of Finance has agreed, and the cabinet, we've approved the 26 budget, gave us 50 million on top of the 5.
Fantastic.
So we're moving in the direction of government funding, self-sustainability, because ultimately these programs have to be funded from budget. It will take another couple of years to be fully locally funded, but that's the direction we're going. And the more we make these programs transparent, accountable, directly between citizen and between government and citizen, the more we're going to see support for it. And this is where I'm heading.
Great. Okay, let's jump to the Syrian refugee question, because it's a very serious issue for Lebanon, for Lebanese. At one point, it was believed there were around 2.5 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon.
No, that's exaggerated, but yes.
Assuming now, you can tell us the number, but we assume there might be a million Syrian refugees and still around 500,000 Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. While your ministry is stretched thin serving Lebanese citizens, does it also have to manage this group of vulnerable people, because they're the most vulnerable in the country as well? We know why the Palestinians haven't been able to return for nearly 80 years to their homeland, but what's your policy regarding the Syrian refugees, and do you think it's safe? I know has there been any talk between the Syrian government and the Lebanese government on, securing a right of return, safe right of return to some of those Syrian refugees who have real fear about returning to Syria?
So thank you for asking this, because this is one of the files, if you will, that our government really has achieved significantly. It achieved a lot. It's a major win, I think, for us already. Today, let me begin with where we are today. Almost 400,000 Syrian displaced are back in Syria. Talking about families and, back in Syria. Out of, let's say, 1.5 million is the UNHCR number. I know 2.5 million is way out of a question. At some point, there were numbers about 2 million, but let's just use the UNHCR number of 1.5 million. So this number of 400,000, and by the end of the year, it might reach even 500,000. It's significant in the sense that now every family, their file has been deactivated. Every family that goes back, their file has been deactivated. And this is different from before, where you'd have people would go, they'd come back, UNHCR could even register them again, maybe they'd be eligible for funding and so on. The plan, so let me take you back. So in our government statement, Bayan Wizari, again, this is one of the priorities, the dignified, safe return of Syrian refugees back to Syria, given the very big change in Syria. I mean, first, the fall of the regime. Second, the lifting of economic sanctions, and more that are coming. And thirdly, of course, the big investments that many of the countries are promising and starting in Syria. So there's a fundamental sea change that's happened across the border. So it's very logical that there will be a return. Lebanon has been hosting the highest per capita refugee population in the world. Now we're in its 14th year. So this can't be, despite the nice, generous support of the international community, but the 1 billion a year that we were getting, let's say, from the international community, was still not, if you will, to compensate for the pressure on the infrastructure, on education, on schooling, on health, and the like. So, obviously, this is a priority for the government, and we approved the plan already in the cabinet in May, called a return plan, which is been actually put together by an interministerial committee. So again, another example of how we work really well together. And this interministerial committee came up with this plan, which provides financial and non-financial incentives for refugees to return. What does it mean? Financial, it's about $100 per person in Lebanon, and then when they cross the border, it's $400 to $600 depending. Secondly, waiving of all penalties, all fees over penalties, because most of them have overstayed their stay in Lebanon and are subject to, gharamat. So the General Security has waived that, so no penalties if you return. And also, if you were to come back legally with a work permit, you can, because normally anybody who overstays in a country, you kind of blacklisted, if you will, you can't return. But now we're saying that if you come back legally with an employer, you can come back. So these are all things to incentivize and to help the return. And as I said, the numbers speak for themselves. We have close to 400,000, and maybe by the end of the year, 500,000 will go back. Now, however, we know that the Lebanese economy needs foreign workers, of which Syrian is a significant number. Before 2011, there must have been about anywhere from 300,000 to 500,000 Syrian workers that come and go, some of seasonally and the like. So this is what we know we will need, some number, and that's the model we probably want to go back to, so that the families are back home safely, but the workers can come and go, but also legally, we want to issue work permits, make this formal. And the Minister of Labor is very active on working on this. By the end of the year, he will announce a program in terms of how all this will work. So this, in fact, has been a positive development, if you will, for Lebanon, but also for Syria. I was in Washington, when I was in Washington a couple of weeks ago, the Minister of Finance of Syria, in a press conference, was asked the question, with all the challenges Syria has, what keeps you hopeful? He said, what keeps me hopeful is that 1 million Syrian refugees have already returned, of course, from Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. So this is a sign that the Syrians have faith. They want to go back to their country, even with it not yet, obviously there's a lot of destruction, hasn't not yet really come back. And we have very good cooperation with the Syrian side. Even before the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Shibani, came to Lebanon, our General Security was coordinating with the Syrian General Security. The Lebanese army is in everyday coordination with the Syrian army. So this has already been going. And now with the visit of Mr. Shibani, this is consolidated, confirmed. The Syrians have expressed very clearly that they welcome their citizens back. I met with my counterpart, the Minister of Social Affairs and Labor of Syria, Ms. Hind Kabawat, in Doha just last week where I was. Same conversation. They welcome their citizens, that they want to do everything they can to help them come back in a dignified way and settle back home.
Well, I think that will give a lot of heart to the Lebanese. Their intentions were, and I think a lot of feeling, weren't racist, but I think because of the impact of the economic collapse on the Lebanese themselves, it was hard to see people, taking opportunities that could have gone to Lebanese. But I think, we all have to be mindful that there's a lot of suffering, and refugees are not here just because of
Of course, they're most vulnerable population. No, absolutely. There's poverty rate among the Syrian refugees here is higher than 80%. Absolutely.
Yeah, and in Australia and America, just been to America and Britain as well. There's a lot of issues related to refugees, and there's welfare systems that need to take care of those people, but America's in a completely different state of mind right now. We won't go into that with immigrants and refugee status. But let's look at just touching back on the international donors demanding reforms. You covered it quite significantly. Do you think that right now, just looking back at where we are right now, with the number of vulnerable people that still are in Lebanon, and you mentioned possibly 10,000 that are still living in shelters, winter is coming, a lot of food insecurity. Are there reforms, or are there programs that could really ease their situation before the coming winter sets in?
I mean, this is why we're trying to find alternative shelter for them as soon as possible. One is because the schools are also needed to go back to function, but also something that is more dignified for them. So this is
covered
one of
in
the
those
main
programs.
Priorities for me going forward in the next few weeks to try to resolve.
Then look at, and it's interesting because I think about the way that you framed the government, and I'm very heartened to hear about the cooperation, cohesion. We think back, this is a technocratic government implementing, technocratic system, but we still have concerns. I think there are still concerns in the community, the Lebanese community here and abroad, that we're asking whether the old power brokers are still in play and whether they're still pulling the strings, the old traditional party machines, the sectarian networks. Is their strength still imposing restrictions on the government in enabling this, the growth and speed with which this government can transform Lebanon by implementing policies that you've talked about and other ministries are trying to implement? Or have we seen has Prime Minister Salam's government and you as minister, the new ministers, have you been able to weather those challenges?
Look, I mean, you can't change things overnight. Many of these dysfunctionalities and this political system that you're referring to have been around for decades, right? Can't change overnight. However, we've started, and I think this is part of, for example, the mechanism that we put in place as a government for appointments of filling in government public positions. It's one of the first time that such a mechanism has been put in place. There was a short-lived experience on the time of Prime Minister Hariri. This is now standard. Any public appointment has to go through this mechanism. Essentially, it's open call for applicants from anywhere, and people apply, and then there's a shortlisting, then there's interviews and the like. So really a competitive process. It's not perfect because nothing really, as I said, you can't change everything on it, but it is actually a good change, a good practice that we put in place. And many of the public positions, so for example, the regulatory authorities, the director generals, the heads of agencies have been filled like that. And so this is, the judicial, the security positions, all have been kind of filled.
And not divided based on religious, what their religion is?
No, I mean, no, there is that. Of course there is that. And many of us actually, of course, don't like it, are not comfortable with it. And we keep reminding that the only thing the Constitution says is that you need 50-50, It doesn't say anything about a sort of 50 Christian, 50 Muslim as a bucket, but it doesn't sit and say Maronite or Shiite or, Druze or that. That has become, unfortunately, the practice. Absolutely, this is not something that I personally adhere to or like, to put it bluntly. Where I'm able to challenge that, I am. And I'm doing it already in my own ministry, where in terms of some of the promotions that I'm making, going counter the grain. So we have to start. We're starting some of that reform. But of course, I think this does take time. Now, I'm also looking at this, potentially seeing if there's some positive look at this. I mean, a lot has been written about the negative aspects of Lebanon's confessional system, and this is what you're referring to here. Yes. But another way of looking at it is that this is inclusion. I mean, this is a country that has many confessional systems, 18, 20 confessional groups, 18 at minimum. So somehow you need to include them all. How do you include them all? That's the question. How do you give them voice? So we can maybe look at it something like, come up with something called progressive confessionalism. Work on the advantage of this, on the good sides of it, so people really do feel included. And I start to think about this now more in my ministry, because I am about a ministry about inclusion. How do you get everybody to have a voice at the table? So let's try to think about how, there could be some good things about this confessional system. Make it progressive, make it positive.
And when you think about it, you always think negatively, because it's not based on merit. It's based on what, you might not be the best person for that role, but because you're a Maronite or you're a Sunni or you're a Shia or whatever you are.
But if I were able to make sure that the best of each group is brought forth, that might be a good thing.
Yeah.
This way you've included the voice of everyone.
Yep.
And you have more
sharing
coherence. You have, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. No one... It does take time, and you're right. And one day, it might be where it's no longer a consideration, but it's not right now. I guess it's not the time right now, but we have to think about this in the future. Let's go to the international dimension right now, and the visit with US Envoy Morgan Ortagus. She paid you a visit, which is rare for a social affairs minister to have that audience.
Yeah, everybody was wondering why.
Yeah. Well, let's ask the question. Was it about genuine interest in your humanitarian work, or was Washington vetting whether this government can deliver on its promises before releasing aid? Because, this ministry is in charge of working with the most vulnerable and where the aid needs to go. But what was your take? Tell us your opinion.
So the visit really was about everything I've been speaking about. It's about inclusion. It's about building the state. And this is what Mrs. Ortagus wanted to know about. Actually, she said that the kind of programs that I and the ministry have been implementing in the South and for displaced people that we just discussed, she thinks that's the right thing, that the U.S. supports that approach. We need to help people. We need to bring them back to the state, fill in that vacuum. So that's what the conversation was about. I think this is, I mean, already my approach is already Prime Minister's approach. This is what we've been, wanting to do with whatever means we have. And of course, I did say that, we need more means for this, but this is really it was to say we believe the state should rebuild itself. We support that kind of work to be there where people are left alone, where Hezbollah withdrawing, if you want to put it, more explicitly, that we come in and help people. In any case, that fits my mandate, fits my beliefs. That this is what I'm doing.
Were there any commitments that the
we
US
didn't, we didn't kind of. I mean, the US is committed to support the Lebanese armed forces now, and they've recently approved another 240 million. We didn't talk funds in that meeting. As you know, also the USAID is pretty much shut down.
Yes.
But maybe if there is, I mean, that's on their horizon. The sort of what I'm doing. I did make a pitch. I threw it out there that, of course, we're going to need more funding. But that's for further conversations.
So could she have just been sizing you up, wanting to get to know you personally, making a personal connection? Obviously listening to the programs, wanting to hear about the programs. Yeah. But
I mean, she could be, but she's also met with other ministers. I mean, in previous visits, one of her first visits, she met with maybe 6 or 7 other ministers. And so I'm not, singled out as on this visit. It was singled out because she came really more for the discussion with the army and that.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing how that relationship develops and whether America really does stand by Lebanon or whether there are conditions attached. Because a lot of people, and this is leading into the next question around the security context for Lebanon. Operating under a very fragile ceasefire agreement we talked about South Lebanon needing between 11 and 14 billion, not only southern Lebanon but other parts of Lebanon, to really recover from the war between Israel and Hezbollah. We know your ministry doesn't have the money, the Lebanese government doesn't have the money, but my point is, but even if Lebanon had the money, even if Lebanon could get the money, is there any point in starting reconstruction, redevelopment, rebuilding in the south with Israel continuing to attack almost daily? Doesn't Lebanon really need to solve this political military situation with Israel, protect our sovereignty, defend Lebanon's sovereignty before any investment in reconstruction in those areas, the Bekaa or the south? Because it's free for all for Israel at the moment.
No, for sure. I mean, we need a serious ceasefire. And our government has repeatedly said that. The Prime Minister, the President, at the international to the international community, that Israel must stop its attacks on Lebanon. And that's an absolute priority, and we are exploring every diplomatic possible way to have this happen. We obviously we want peace. We don't want this to continue, and we cannot have stability, either social or economic stability, until that is done. Now, part of the equation, of course, is also the decision that our government took on August 5, which is that no arms outside the purview or the control of the state. That is also something we are committed to. And we are also exploring all diplomatic means to have this happen. And also, as you know, we mandated the Lebanese army to start this process, which they have started. We have had 2 reports from the commander of the army briefing us on where they've reached. There's good progress in south of Litani primarily. It's not complete yet, and part of that not completing is because also there are the daily violations by the Israelis. But there's also, throughout the country, there is a policy of containment, which the army is also implementing, i.e., in regions you cannot move or use weapons. They are contained there, and this is implemented or enforced through roadblocks and the like that the army, and you probably felt it and seen it in other parts of the country where they are, increasing their checks in the roads. So we're committed to this, and the Prime Minister has said that, the President has said that. We know it's challenging from both sides. From the Israelis, they're not making it easier, and of course the Hezbollah is
not complying.
Still talking big, let's say, in terms of that they do not want to comply. And I think this is a direct violation of or contradiction of the government's statement and approval of August 5.
As you know, I had an interview with the a member of parliament for the Hezbollah party, and we've seen Tom Barak, we've seen Morgan Ortagus, we've even seen Amos Hochstein. Just the last couple of months, there's been a whole series of American diplomats or officials who've made statements on the situation with disarming Hezbollah and not taking sides, just looking at the rhetoric that comes out. Even when asked, Amos Hochstein, the former US envoy under Biden, said it is a problem to try and impose disarmament on Hezbollah when Israel continues to violate the ceasefire. Mr. Ibrahim Moussawi, the Hezbollah MP, was very open in his conversation with me about Hezbollah being willing to hand over its weapons if Israel was, complying with the ceasefire, and that it had never complied and has violated hundreds of times the ceasefire agreement. And their question was, why is America and the Lebanese government imposing more conditions on Hezbollah when Hezbollah is moving complying with the ceasefire agreement, and yet nothing is being done or said in relation to Israel. And those conversations have been had by those officials, American officials, who admit Israel's doing what it's doing and say we have no control over Israel. And the bigger question is then, if there is no control over Israel, can the Lebanese army defend Lebanon? And we've just seen the president, not a couple of weeks ago, when a Lebanese villager was killed by Israeli fire, not a week or so ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, the Lebanese president asking the army to move to the south to protect the borders. Now, I don't know if they are in place or they're moving into that direction, but it's a sign of, yes, it's something that the Lebanese army needs to do and take charge. But this is a really, fiery question, because there's a lot of people who feel that it's an egg and, it's a cat and mouse game. What do you do first when you know that the enemy, like Israel, we've witnessed its atrocities in Gaza and its attacks on Syria and then other Arab nations as well as Lebanon. How do you trust a alleged, combatant on the other side, adversary, let's say, on the other side, when they've done nothing to make you have any confidence that they will comply and end their attacks?
Israel is an enemy, is the enemy. It is, and there's no trust in politics, I think, in realpolitik. So that's, but we have to, for me, in the end, has to be, and it can only be the army of Lebanon that can defend. Now, the army, of course, is still needs reinforcement and the like, but I would rather have, an army or a state versus a state fighting it out or figuring it out than a state versus a militia.
Definitely.
That formula just doesn't work. It has proven it hasn't worked. It has destroyed Lebanon. It's just destroyed Gaza, unfortunately, the suffering of Gaza, of the children, and similarly here we've had the same thing. It hasn't been able to defend the country. In fact, to the contrary, it's brought a huge amount of destruction. So we want to get, the disarmament is not just about sort of Hezbollah it's about, of course, all arms in the country that have to be in just one in the hands of the army, so that the army can. That way, we would have a much stronger position also in front of the international community to say that it's a state versus a state, compared to now where we're talking about state versus the militia.
Does it give you more power, you believe?
Sorry?
Does it give the Lebanese government and army more power if the arms are fully under the control of the Lebanese army?
Of course. I mean,
negotiating
also
diplomatically,
it will give us a lot more credence, if you will, credibility, to say that Lebanon as a state, as a government, the army, and so on. So the army is the one that really has to be defending its borders and defending the state, and that's what we want to get to. So. Yes, of course, we need the cooperation of Hezbollah to give up its weapons and to really agree to this formula, because it's not something that we're going to do willing to do by force, because it will just not be
Would it create a civil strife and civil war?
It's potentially, but I mean the point is that of course we want this to be, and this is where conversation, negotiations, discussions have to continue. But the demand of the Lebanese people is that these, regardless of whether there was attacks from Israel or not, we want to get to a situation where Lebanon has just one army defending it, doing its role, and really that's and of course, because this is important for being able to have a level playing field in politics, in our internal politics. When you have one group that is armed and most of the others pretty much not armed, this makes a huge uneven balance in terms of the power play in the country. So regardless of whether the Israeli thing was there or not, that's also important for our own stability, our own getting us back in coming back to this sort of progressive confessionalism, approach, that all confessions must have some kind of seat at different tables at different time, but they have to be at a level playing field. And if one confession has arms and the other doesn't, or one political party has arms and the other, that immediately changes the balance of power.
Which leads perfectly into my next question on sectarian and gender dynamics, and being a Sunni woman in a high-profile ministry in a confessional system. Does that identity shape how you're perceived? Does it shape, by the way you're perceived by the public, by other politicians, by international players, or is it your competence? Do you think that, talking about your progressive confessionalism, which is a very interesting idea, what do you think? How does it affect you, and what do you want to see?
I mean, for sure, people within the system in Lebanon look at me like that, right? I don't look at me like that, though. I'm looking at myself as someone who's, has, of course, the technical skills, but that's not just really. You need to have way more than technical skills. This notion of technocrats is really, I believe, is a bit bogus. I mean, we cannot be a minister or a public servant and just be technical. You've got to have many other skills and capabilities. But I look at myself as, yes, certainly as a woman, and a woman who's in public policy who wants to help people and also to empower other women to achieve and to rise. But yes, I know that the sort of system looks at me as they put a Sunni woman there. You'd laugh, but I don't know half the confession of most of my staff. I have no clue. I don't ask. Then sometimes, I'm told, you must pay attention to this or that. Okay, you start to pay attention, but it's something that actually doesn't come naturally to me to ask. But I am aware that that's how people look at you. Some people look at you in our system here, yes.
It's a challenge, isn't it? Because, working so many years externally and not even crossing your mind to ask anyone what religion they are. It's like, you can see the gender, but it's irrelevant as well, as long as they do their job. But it is a sensitivity still here in Lebanon, which is going to take a bit of time to move forward from. But it comes from bringing in people with that open-mindedness that just doesn't, I don't even contemplate
and all
it.
of our youth are like that, so that's also very, we need to now really give youth this possibility to come into public policy, to come into the because for many years they're sort of, the governments are decaying, they're corrupt and so on, but really our hope is the youth. Really, that's the hope for Lebanon, like in many countries, but really in Lebanon. And many of the youth that are here, I'm not just talking about the youth of the diaspora. Sometimes we just think change comes from the diaspora. No, we have incredible youth coming out of our schools and our universities, and they want change. They want, the good systems. They want, accountability. They want, want everybody else, education, good health. They want jobs. So
and they want to stay.
And I think they will, over time, they will make the difference. Yes, they will make that change.
The problem is the youth in the diaspora were forced to leave to find opportunities, and there's a lot of people I've met who are very young at universities, and they do it to get better degrees but to open opportunities that Lebanon for the last 30, 40 years hasn't offered them. But I've seen recently a meeting that the Prime Minister Nawaf Salam had with a youth group, and it was very encouraging to listen to how positive they were about him too, and his leadership and what he represents, which is something that reflects what they want, and that is a very democratic, aligned Lebanon that reflects their vision and their hope for the future. So there's a lot of positive things to take away from that. One last question on gender, but it's part of the context. Do you ever see yourself as a future Prime Minister of Lebanon?
Don't go there, Daizy. No,
I do.
I don't have political ambitions. No, I have ambition to help in the ministry, to help people. I can see myself continuing doing this kind of thing because I want to help people, but that's really what I'm committed to, is to helping people in the kind of work that I'm doing right now.
Something other people are thinking about for you.
You see, that's because, she's Sunni, therefore she's a...
But that's right. When you've got to play with the system that you've got today, when you're dealing with the system you've got, you look at what are the options available. We look at Dr. Inaya Izzeddin as a potential to replace, Nabi Berri, but that would take a huge thing. But we have a lot of respect for her and everything that she's done, and we see her as a progressive as well. But it's in that mindset, is like, who else could there be, Talking about women...
So, answered your question, no.
Looking at the 5 women ministers that were appointed in this government was also a very positive thing. We would have liked more, obviously, not only here for Lebanon, but around the world. It's a necessary change that needs to be addressed. People look at it as tokenism, that this 5 women were appointed to this cabinet. Do you feel you have genuine authority? Do you feel that the women in the ministries that they're fulfilling have genuine authority, or are there limits being placed on you and other women?
No, we have genuine authority. I don't feel any restrictions on us. Each and every one of us, just like the male ministers, are fully empowered. We're equal seats at the table. I'm the thorn in cabinet. Every time there's an appointment, I say, where's the gender? There's no women on the short list? I keep kind of pushing that because you need that. And sometimes I succeed, sometimes I don't, to be frank. In fact, it's a little disappointing for me, the appointments that have been made at the very senior level in governments, that there's not enough women represented, although we have obviously some many qualified. But then they come up with all sorts of reasons. The confessional balance comes in, right? We needed to have a Maronite or a Sunni or what have you. But I keep pushing on that. But I think we're all fully empowered, all 5 ministers. And in my own ministry, my senior management is actually all women. And again, but that's because they're really good. I mean, but not
intentional.
Absolutely, but they're all very good. And I believe where there's talent and where there's skills and there's commitment, you need to support it. But I'm very proud that they're almost all women. There's one guy.
Getting to the last question now. I know we've been talking for a while, but very importantly, you left a very cushy job. Not a cushy, very important job, a very comfortable position, a very influential role. Why did you do that? What made you decide this role for Lebanon was more important than what you were doing?
It is more important than what I was doing at the World Bank, because here I'm serving my country. And when the call came in late January, I was actually in Dubai. I was just finished attending an art event, and I was, a bit of on holiday. But I did not hesitate. One, because working, of course, the president had just been sworn in, and, is a great hope for Lebanon. Prime Minister, having an opportunity to work with, Dr. Nawaf Salam it's an honor. He is, his background, and a man of such integrity who just wants to do the right thing for Lebanon. So I believe in his values. So having this opportunity to serve with the president and the prime minister is something you really don't say no to. And I've always wanted to serve my country in a different way. So that's really what made the decision for me.
And we're very proud and excited that you did take that position. And we know how committed you are and how strong you are in relation to ethics, principles and values. So Lebanon is better for you being here. I'd just like to ask you if there's anything else you'd like to tell our audience and listeners from your perspective, or whether you've covered it. We've covered it.
No, the only thing I would say is that, as I mentioned, I think it's the youth of Lebanon in and out of the country that give us hope. They're the winds of change. I think it's already happening. And for me, the ultimate KPI that we achieved is when we start to have our youth coming back. My daughter, for example, who's in London, the minute she tells me I'm coming back, Mommy, because I want to now live in Lebanon, I know that we have turned the corner.
That's beautiful. My daughter is with me at the moment, but she's going back to Australia, but she loves Lebanon. She's grown up in Australia all her life, but she spent 6 months before she starts job at Deloitte's next year here in Lebanon, and she would love to stay. But that's a good sign, a very good sign. And I agree with you. When the youth want to come back and choose Lebanon, a lot of diaspora would love to, and I think that would be the time that indicates how that Lebanon has moved forward. Inshallah. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and we hope that our audience has thoroughly gotten to know who you are and the significance of the role that you're fulfilling. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Daizy.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk and experiencing firsthand the real stories told by real people. I hope you found value and meaning, and encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Your ongoing financial support is vital to our ability to continue delivering these stories, so please remember to click on the donate button in the description, giving only what you can afford. I spent my whole life giving my time, money and skill to serve human rights and social justice causes, and I know it's not easy to keep giving selflessly. But this work is important because the mainstream media has failed to live up to their obligations. So we need to step up, speak up, or we're no better than them. I believe by tuning in to this podcast, you are someone who wants to know the facts and the truth, so you can independently decide what to believe and what not to. My job is to deliver that information. Yours is to place a value on it. Whatever you decide is humbly welcome. Thanks again, and see you on the next episode of Real Talk.